Claire didn't just laugh. She let it slip out like something already decided. It was quick, almost careless, the kind of sound people make when they believe the outcome belongs to them. I had taken the earlier bus, arrived 10 minutes ahead of time, and sat quietly in that glass-walled office, with my purse folded neatly in my lap, thinking we were there to organize things, to make life easier for everyone. "She doesn't have access to her accounts," Claire said, tapping her nails lightly against the desk. "It's safer if we handle it." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. For a second, the room held still. Mr. Andrew Cole, the bank manager, paused mid-click. His eyes shifted from her to me, then back again. Careful, measured. Daniel stood beside her, shoulders tight, not correcting her, not even looking in my direction. I didn't move. I had spent 38 years balancing books down to the last cent. Numbers didn't frighten me. Silence didn't either. But being spoken about as if I weren't sitting right there, that settled somewhere deeper. "Actually," Mr. Cole said gently, turning the monitor slightly toward me, "Mrs. Wallace is the sole account holder. There are no restrictions on her access." Something shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but enough. Claire's smile flickered, just for a moment. Not surprise, something closer to irritation, quickly hidden. Daniel exhaled, under his breath, like someone who hadn't realized he'd been holding it. "Oh," she said smoothly, "I must have misunderstood." She didn't look at me. Not once. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Because misunderstanding has a shape, and this wasn't it. There had been too much certainty in her voice, too much ease, the kind that comes from believing something has already been arranged. Mr. Cole glanced at me again. "You mentioned reviewing account permissions today. There's no need to decide anything immediately." "I'd prefer to keep everything as it is," I said. My voice was steady, quieter than Claire's. But it held. Daniel shifted beside her. "Mom, we're just trying to help," he said. "Online banking can get confusing." Confusing. I let the words sit between us. There are moments when you realize a conversation didn't begin where you thought it did, that it had already been unfolding somewhere else, behind closed doors in decisions made without you. "I'm not confused," I said. Mr. Cole gave a small nod. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. It wasn't what she said that stayed with me. It was how easily they spoke as if I wasn't part of the decision at all. Outside, the winter light felt distant, as if everything had been pushed a little further away. Claire walked ahead, heels striking the pavement in steady, controlled steps. Daniel followed slower, hands in his pockets. He used to take my arm at curbs when he was small. Now he didn't reach for me at all. "It would have been simpler if you'd just signed," Claire said when we reached the car. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes didn't. "We're thinking long-term. What's practical?" Practical, a word that often means something is being taken from you for your own good. "I'll think about it," I said. She nodded, as if that answer had already been expected. Daniel opened the car door, hesitated. "Do you want a ride home?" "I'll take the bus." Neither of them insisted. When they drove off, I stayed where I was a moment longer than necessary. The cold settled into my hands, but that wasn't what stayed with me. It was the certainty. The way she had spoken, the way he hadn't said anything. The quiet assumption that decisions about my life could be made in rooms I hadn't entered. Something about that didn't begin today, and I had a feeling it wouldn't end here either. My name is Brenda Wallace. I'm 77 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being reliable meant being respected. Maybe that was where I went wrong. The bus ride home blurred past familiar streets. Nothing had changed outside, but something inside it had. If you've ever had someone decide what's best for you without asking, tell me where you're watching from. Stay with me, because what happened after that afternoon made me question everything. Or maybe I had changed before I realized it. At home, I hung my coat on the chair Richard had made years ago, my hand brushing the worn wood without thinking. Some habits just stay, even when people don't. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The small, ordinary sounds felt steady, predictable in a way nothing else did. Confusing, Daniel had said. I thought about the last few years. How often had Claire stepped in to answer for me, to explain things before I could? To take over small decisions because it would be faster? At the time, it had seemed harmless, easier to let it pass, easier to assume it was kindness. But patterns don't announce themselves all at once. They build quietly until one moment makes everything harder to ignore. The kettle whistled. I poured the water, carried the cup to the table, but didn't sit. There is a difference between being helped and being managed. And standing there with the tea cooling in my hands, I realized something that unsettled me more than anything that had happened at the bank. I wasn't sure when I had stopped being asked and started being told. I set the cup down slowly. Because now, for the first time, I wasn't just thinking about what they were trying to do. I was starting to wonder how long it had already been happening. Something about that moment didn't sit right with me. And I didn't know it yet. But that feeling was about to get a lot harder to ignore. I didn't like how quiet the house felt. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it felt unchanged. The same kitchen. The same clock ticking steadily on the wall. The same light falling across the table. Everything exactly where it had always been, and yet something from that bank office hadn't stayed behind. It had followed me home. I set the cup down again, untouched now. My fingers resting briefly against the ceramic before pulling away. Claire's voice lingered, not loud, not sharp, but certain. That kind of certainty doesn't come from guessing. It comes from expecting. She doesn't have access. Not might not. Not let's check. A statement. I moved slowly through the kitchen, my eyes passing over small, ordinary things without really seeing them. For years, I had trusted those ordinary moments. Let things pass because they didn't feel important enough to question. It had always been easier that way, but ease has a way of hiding patterns. I leaned lightly against the counter, folding my arms without realizing it. Confusing, Daniel had said. I let that word settle. How many times had something similar been said before? Not always in those exact words, but in tone, in implication. Let me take care of that. It'll be faster this way. You don't need to worry about it. At the time, I had accepted it. It sounded like help, like consideration, and maybe in the beginning it had been, but help doesn't usually come with that kind of assumption. I pushed away from the counter and walked into the living room. The photograph on the side table caught my attention again. Daniel at 12, holding up that uneven birdhouse. He had refused help that day, refused to let anyone fix it for him. I'll get it, he had said, stubborn and certain. And he had. Not perfectly, but it had been his. I stood there a moment longer, something about that memory settling differently now. People don't change overnight. If something had shifted, it would have happened slowly, quietly, in ways that didn't demand attention, just like everything else. I turned toward the hallway, my steps more deliberate now. There are things you keep over the years, not out in the open, but not hidden either. Papers, records, the the small details that add up over time. I stopped in front of the cabinet. At the bank, Claire hadn't sounded unsure. She had sounded like she was continuing something already in motion. And things in motion don't leave clean edges. They leave traces. I opened the cabinet. Everything inside was exactly as I had left it. Folders arranged neatly, envelopes labeled in my own handwriting. Years of order, carefully kept. I pulled one folder out and carried it back to the table. For a moment, I just looked at it. Then I opened it. The first pages were routine. Utilities, insurance, nothing unusual. I turned another page, then another. At first, it was just numbers, until it wasn't. A payment caught my attention, not large, not urgent. A transfer to Daniel's account marked simply as temporary help. I frowned, slightly turning the page. Another one, different month, different reason. A repair, a bill adjustment, a shortfall covered quietly. I leaned closer, my fingers resting lightly against the paper. None of it stood out on its own. That was the problem. Individually, each one made sense. A small assist, a moment of support, something that would pass. But together, they didn't disappear. They lined up. I turned another page, then another. A dental bill that had been unexpected, a portion of the mortgage that had been tight that month, an insurance payment that had needed temporary coverage. Each one explained, each one reasonable, each one accepted without much thought at the time. I sat back slowly. The details didn't come back all at once, not clearly. But I recognized the shape of it, conversations that had ended quickly, situations that had resolved themselves without follow-up, moments where something had been taken care of before it became a problem. I had never questioned it, because I hadn't needed to, or so I thought. My hand rested flat against the table now, grounding myself as the pattern settled into place. This wasn't one moment. It wasn't even a handful. It was something that had been building, quietly, steadily, over time. And I had been part of it, not forced, not pressured, just present. I closed the folder partway, my thumb still holding the edge. At the bank, Claire hadn't been guessing. She had been continuing something that had already been happening, with or without me noticing. The room around me hadn't changed. The same light, the same quiet. But it didn't feel the same anymore, because now the question wasn't whether something was wrong. It was how far it had already gone, and whether I had been the last to see it. I didn't say anything to Daniel that evening. He had called earlier, his voice casual in a way that felt practiced, asking if I wanted to come by for dinner. Just something simple, he had said. Claire's making reservations. Reservations. I had paused, thinking of the folder still open on my table, the numbers that no longer felt separate. But I had said yes. It felt important to see things clearly. The restaurant was already busy when I arrived. Warm light spilled through the windows and the low hum of conversation filled the space. Glasses clinked softly. Laughter came and went in brief waves. I spotted them near the entrance. Claire stood slightly ahead of Daniel, speaking to the host with easy confidence. Daniel nodded beside her, quiet, letting her lead. I walked toward them. "Hi," I said. Daniel turned first. "Hey, Mom," he replied, stepping forward just enough to acknowledge me, but not quite closing the distance. Claire glanced over, her smile appearing quickly. "You made it," she said. There was no surprise in her voice. The host looked between us. "Table for 4?" he asked. The empty chair stayed empty. Claire smiled, then shook her head lightly. "Actually, 3. I think that was the moment I understood. It wasn't about a mistake. It was about where I no longer fit. What happened next wasn't loud, but it changed everything. And I think that was the moment I stopped seeing them the same way. I just stood there for a second, not saying anything. What would you have done in that moment? Would you speak up or just walk away? Stay with me, because what happened next made everything even clearer. The word landed without effort. The host hesitated, his eyes flicking toward me before returning to her. "Yes," Claire added, already angling herself toward the dining room. "We're meeting someone." Daniel didn't correct her. He didn't look at me. He didn't reach for me either. I stepped closer. "I thought I was joining you," I said, keeping my voice even. Claire turned back, her expression softening just enough to pass for polite. "Oh, Brenda," she said, adjusting her tone as if fixing something small. "We didn't think you'd be comfortable tonight. It's a bit of a long evening." "A business dinner," she added. "It might get technical." "I can stay," I said. Simple, direct. Claire held her smile. "We've already planned it this way," she replied. "We didn't want you to feel out of place." Out of place? I looked at Daniel. For a moment, he almost met my eyes. Then he didn't. "Mom," he said quietly, "it's probably not your kind of thing." "Not your kind of thing." I nodded once, not in agreement, in recognition. The host shifted slightly, menus still in his hands, his posture tightening as if he had stepped into something unintended. Claire turned back to him. "3, she repeated, lighter now. "We're ready." He hesitated only a second before nodding. "Right this way." They began to follow him. Daniel paused, just briefly, as if something in him might pull him back. Then he didn't. He walked after her. I stayed where I was. The noise of the restaurant carried on around me, but it felt distant now, like it belonged somewhere else entirely. For a moment, I considered calling his name, saying something that would stop them, but I let it pass, because this wasn't confusion, and it wasn't happening by accident. I turned toward the door. The air outside was colder than I expected. Cars moved steadily down the street, headlights sliding across the pavement. People passed by without noticing anything unusual. I walked a few steps, then stopped. It wasn't the exclusion itself that stayed with me. It was how easily it had happened. No discussion, no hesitation. Just a quiet adjustment, made ahead of time, as if my place had already been reconsidered and removed. I exhaled slowly. At the bank, Claire had spoken with certainty. At my table, the numbers had formed a pattern, and here, there had been no place for me at all. I stood there, letting the pieces settle into something clearer than before. This wasn't about convenience. It wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about position, and mine had changed, without being said, without needing to be. I turned and began walking down the street, the restaurant fading behind me with each step. This time, I didn't try to explain it away. I already knew what I had seen, and that made it impossible to ignore. I didn't go home right away. I walked past the restaurant and halfway down the block before I slowed. The cold air helped, sharp enough to cut through the noise in my head, if only slightly. By the time I turned back, the decision had already settled. When I stepped inside, the house felt the same, but I didn't. I hung my coat, set my bag down, and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. It wasn't the kind of quiet I was used to. This one carried something heavier, out of place, not your kind of thing. The words didn't echo. They stayed. I moved into the kitchen and poured the tea I had left earlier down the sink. The small sound of ceramic against the counter felt louder than it should have. Claire hadn't hesitated. Daniel hadn't stepped in. And whatever had happened tonight, it had been decided before I arrived. That was the part that mattered. Not the words, the plan. I leaned against the counter, steadying myself against something solid. There had been a time when I would have explained it away, found a reason that made it easier to accept. Tonight didn't feel like something that needed explaining. It felt like something that had been arranged. A knock at the door broke the silence. 2 quick taps. A pause. I crossed the room and opened it. Sophie stood there, her shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. "Grandma," she said, stepping inside, "I didn't know if you'd be back yet." "I just got home," I said, closing the door. She looked at me a second longer than usual, not searching, just noticing. "You went to dinner?" she asked. "I did." A brief pause. "How was it?" I held her gaze. "Clarifying," I said. She nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something she already suspected. We moved into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands resting loosely in her lap. I took the chair across from her. Neither of us rushed. "They didn't expect you to be there," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I answered. She exhaled quietly. "I thought so." I watched her. "Why?" She shifted slightly, her fingers tightening for a moment before relaxing. "Because they've been talking about it," she said. "About what?" "About you," she replied. "About your accounts, about making things simpler." Simpler. The word landed differently now. "How long?" I asked. "A while," she said. "Not recent, not accidental. Time." "And Daniel?" I asked. She hesitated, then answered carefully. "He didn't start it, but he didn't stop it." That felt right. Too easy. "Did they talk to you about it directly?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not really. More like they didn't think I was paying attention." A small, quiet truth. "What did they say?" I asked. Sophie looked down briefly, then back up. "That you didn't need to handle things anymore, that it would be easier if someone else took over, that it was temporary, until everything was organized." Organized. The same language, the same assumption. "And did they ever mention me agreeing to this?" I asked. "No," she said. "Simple, clear." I let that settle. "Sophie," I said, "why are you telling me this?" She didn't hesitate. She didn't answer right away. "Because they're not asking you." I didn't answer her right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because part of me still wanted it to be something else, something smaller, something easier to explain. "I'm sure they didn't mean it like that," I said finally, though the words didn't sit right even as I spoke them. Sophie didn't argue. She just looked at me, quietly, steadily, the way someone does when they've already seen the part you're still trying to soften. "I know what it sounds like," I added almost to myself. "But Daniel wouldn't just take over like that?" She tilted her head slightly. "He didn't start it," she said again, "but he didn't stop it either." That stayed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just there. I nodded slowly, more to end the moment than to agree with it. "Maybe it's just been building," I said. "Small things, not something they planned." "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. After she left, I didn't move right away. The room felt the same chair, the same light, the same quiet, but something in it no longer felt neutral. I walked back into the kitchen, my hand resting briefly on the edge of the counter as if I needed something steady. There are moments when you realize you might be wrong, and then there are moments when you realize you've been choosing not to look. I wasn't sure which one this was yet. I poured myself another cup of tea, more out of habit than anything else, and stood there watching the steam rise. Daniel had never asked for more than he needed, not when he was younger, not when things were simple. So when had that changed? Or had it? I set the cup down, untouched again, because the question wasn't just about what he had done, it was about what I had allowed to continue without noticing. And for the first time, I couldn't tell which part unsettled me more. The room felt still again, but no longer uncertain. Everything I had seen, the bank, the numbers, tonight, had pointed in the same direction. Now, it had a voice. "They think they're helping," she added quietly. I nodded once. Yes. That sounded right. I looked at her for a moment longer, then turned my gaze toward the window. The night had settled fully outside, the glass reflecting a faint outline of the room behind me. Help doesn't usually happen like this. Not quietly. Not without being asked. And not by leaving someone out of their own life. I turned back to her. "They didn't forget," I said. Sophie held my gaze. "They decided." After Sophie left, the house felt quieter than before. Not empty, just settled. The kind of quiet that doesn't distract you anymore. I stayed where I was for a while, her words still sitting between everything else I had already seen, not adding something new, exactly, but giving shape to what had been forming. They're not asking you, simple, clear. I stood and walked back to the table, where the folder still rested exactly as I had left it. The edge of the paper caught the light, a thin line that hadn't meant anything earlier. Now it did. I pulled the chair out and sat down slowly. For a moment, I didn't open the folder, because this time I knew what I was looking for. Not individual moments. A pattern. I flipped it open. The first pages were familiar. Utilities, insurance, the steady rhythm of ordinary expenses. I turned one page, then another, numbers, dates, nothing unusual. Until I stopped looking at them separately. I leaned closer, my fingers resting lightly against the paper as I began to follow the lines differently, not one at a time, but across. That's when it changed. A transfer to Daniel's account. Not large, not urgent. Labeled simply as temporary help. I turned the page. Another one. A few months later, different note, same direction. I didn't rush now. I moved through it carefully, letting each entry settle before going to the next. A repair that had needed attention, a bill that had been tight that month, an insurance payment that had been covered until things evened out. Each one explained, each one reasonable, each one easy to agree to at the time. One of them was for a dental bill I had put off that same month. I sat back slightly, letting the pages fall open in front of me. Individually, nothing stood out. Together, they didn't disappear. They aligned. It didn't feel like one decision anymore. It felt like something that had been quietly allowed to continue. It wasn't new. It had been happening. I turned another page, then another. The amounts shifted. Some smaller, some just enough to close a gap, but the direction never changed. Always outward, always from me, and always just enough that it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a moment. I rested my hand flat against the table, grounding myself as the pattern settled more clearly into place. This wasn't support in the way I had understood it. Support is occasional. This was consistent, quiet, expected. I flipped back a few pages, then forward again, tracing the same line over time. There it was again, and again, not discussed, not revisited, just continued. I closed my eyes briefly, not to avoid it, but to hold it still long enough to understand it. At the bank, Claire had spoken with certainty. At dinner, there had been no place for me at all. And here, in front of me, was the part that connected both. I had been present in every step of it, But I hadn't been seeing it. That realization didn't come all at once. It settled gradually, the way everything else had. I had said yes, each time for reasons that made sense in the moment, because something needed fixing, because something felt temporary, because it was easier to help than to question. I opened my eyes again and looked down at the pages. The explanations were still there. They hadn't changed, but they didn't hold the same meaning anymore, because they weren't separate anymore. They were part of something that had been building quietly, without ever needing to be acknowledged out loud. I had agreed to every piece of it. I just hadn't realized they were all leading to the same place. I gathered the edges of the papers and straightened them, aligning them carefully even though they didn't need it. A habit. Order where I could create it. But this wasn't something that had been disorganized. It had been structured, just not by me. I let that thought settle, not rushed, not resisted, just recognized. The house was still, the same light, the same quiet, the same familiar weight of everything around me, but now there was something else beneath it. Clarity, not sharp, not sudden, but steady. I closed the folder slowly, my hand lingering on the cover for a moment before letting it rest. Because this wasn't about one transfer or one decision. It was about something that had been allowed to continue long enough to feel normal, and that was what made it harder to ignore. I leaned back in the chair, letting my gaze settle somewhere beyond the table, beyond the room. For the first time, I wasn't trying to explain it. I wasn't trying to soften it. I was just seeing it, and that was enough. I didn't need to think about it again the next morning. The numbers had already made the decision for me. I took my coat, my bag, and the folder, and left the house without lingering. The bus ride felt shorter this time. I sat near the front, watching the same streets pass by, but there was nothing left to interpret. Only something to act on. The bank looked exactly the same. Glass doors, clean lines, quiet efficiency. I stepped inside. Mr. Andrew Cole looked up as I approached. Recognition came first, followed by something more measured. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, standing. "Good morning." "Good morning." He gestured toward the chair. "Please, have a seat." I sat. He waited a moment. "How can I help you today?" I placed the folder on the desk, but didn't open it. "I'd like to review my accounts," I said, "and make a few changes." He nodded once. "Of course." The screen lit up with the account details. Numbers I already knew appeared in clean rows. "Everything here is currently under your sole authorization," he said. "No additional users or permissions have been granted. I'd like to keep it that way." "Understood." He paused, then added, "We did receive prior inquiries about adding shared access. None were completed." I looked at him. "How many?" He checked. "Several over the past year." That was enough. I want to make sure no future requests can be processed without my direct approval. "We can add an extra verification layer," he said. "Do that." He entered the changes, the quiet rhythm of the keyboard filling the space between us. "What else would you like to adjust?" he asked. "I want to review outgoing transfers." He pulled up the history. The entries appeared exactly as they had the night before. Dates, amounts, destination. But now, stripped of explanation, they felt different. Cleaner, more direct. I pointed to a series of recurring transfers. "These." He studied them briefly. "Regular transfers," he said. "Would you like to modify them?" "I want them stopped." He paused just enough to confirm. "All of them?" "Yes." There was no hesitation in it, no reconsidering, just an answer that had already been decided. He nodded. "Understood." One by one, he began processing the cancellations. Each transfer required confirmation. Each confirmation required a deliberate action. I watched the screen as the list changed. Active, pending, then removed. Not undone, not erased, just no longer continuing. A small shift, repeated enough times to matter. These are now inactive, he said when he finished. No further transfers will go out unless you authorize them. I nodded once. Thank you. He turned slightly toward me again. Everything remains under your sole control. Sole control. I let the words settle. They weren't new, but they hadn't felt this clear before. Is there anything else you'd like to review? He asked. No, I said. That was enough. I gathered the folder, though I didn't need to look at it again. The numbers hadn't changed, but their meaning had. As I stood, he added, "If anything comes up, don't hesitate to reach out." I won't. I left the bank. Outside, the air felt sharper. Not different, just easier to breathe. Nothing dramatic had happened. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just a series of decisions made quietly. And this time, they were mine. I walked down the sidewalk at a steady pace, letting the moment settle without rushing past it. Control doesn't always return all at once. Sometimes it comes back the same way it was taken, gradually, without needing to be announced. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. My phone rang. The sound cut through everything. I stopped and looked at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Mom? His voice came quickly, tighter than usual. Hey, I was just checking. Did something happen with the account? I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to hear the silence. On the other end, I could hear movement, papers shifting, footsteps. Because a couple of payments didn't go through, he added, faster now. The mortgage, Claire said something bounced, and he stopped. Just for a second. Long enough to realize something wasn't where he expected it to be. Mom? He said again, quieter now. This time, there was something else in his voice. Not confusion, something closer to concern. Or maybe the beginning of it. And for the first time, I could hear exactly where it came from. I didn't answer him right away. I let the silence sit, just long enough for him to hear it. Mom? Daniel said again, sharper this time. Did you change something? Yes. The word landed cleanly. A pause followed. What do you mean? He asked, slower now. The payments didn't go through. Claire checked this morning and I stopped them. Another silence. Longer this time. You stopped them? He repeated. Yes. Mom, those weren't just... He caught himself. We had things lined up. The mortgage, the insurance. I know exactly what they were. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You didn't say anything, he said, the edge creeping in now. We could have talked about this first. We could have. The words settled. He understood. You think this is a misunderstanding? He asked. Because it's not. We've been trying to manage things responsibly. You don't need to carry everything on your own anymore. I wasn't carrying anything I didn't choose to. That's not the point, he said quickly. It's about stability. Claire's been handling most of it because it's easier that way. I wasn't worried. That stopped him. Just for a second, then he pushed forward. Well, we were, he said. We're thinking long-term here. I reviewed the accounts, I said. The line went quiet again. And? He asked. And I saw the pattern. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. You're making this sound worse than it is, he said. Those were temporary adjustments. You helped when things were tight. That's what families do. Yes, I said. They ask. Silence. We didn't think it needed to be a discussion every time, he said finally. It would have just complicated things. For who? I asked. No answer. Mom, he said, lowering his voice now, shifting tone. This isn't about taking anything from you. It's about making things run smoothly. Claire understands this better. The systems, the paperwork. She understands control. A pause. That's not fair, he said. It's accurate. I heard movement on the other end, quieter now. She's been helping, he insisted. I know. That caught him. Then why are you doing this? He asked. I'm not reacting, I said. I made a decision. The silence that followed was different, uneasy. You're overthinking this, he said, but the certainty was gone. No, I said. I'm seeing it. A small shift on the line, then her voice. I told you she'd notice eventually. Claire. Claire? Daniel started. It's fine, she said. Let me. The phone shifted. Brenda, she said, calm, controlled. We weren't trying to exclude you. We were trying to protect you. From what? From complexity. Things you don't need to deal with anymore. Financial systems, legal requirements. It makes more sense for someone else to manage that. Without asking. We didn't think you'd object. That was the truth. I do, I said. A pause. Then she continued, more deliberate now. You need to understand. This isn't just preference. There are practical considerations. If something were to happen, there needs to be structure in place. There already is. Not a sufficient one, she replied. Not legally. I let that sit. You're talking about control. I'm talking about responsibility, she corrected, and if necessary, that responsibility can be formalized. There it was. In what way? I asked. A brief pause. Then she said it. Guardianship. The word landed without echo. Daniel shifted in the background. Claire, maybe we don't need to. We do, she said, because this is exactly what creates problems later. I almost smiled. You think this is resistance? I asked. I think it's avoidance, she replied, of something that's going to happen eventually anyway. Not like this, I said. Another pause. Then, steady and clear, she said, We're trying to do this the right way. But if that's not possible, there are other ways to ensure things are handled appropriately. The threat was no longer implied. It was stated. Clearly. I let the silence stretch. Not hesitation. Choice. Because now, everything was exactly where it needed to be. Visible. Defined. I've already made my decision, I said. There was a pause, then a quiet breath from her. Then we'll proceed accordingly. The call ended. Just like that. No raised voices, no argument, just a decision. On both sides. I lowered the phone slowly, the screen going dark in my hand. And for the first time, there was nothing left that needed to be explained. I didn't call Daniel back, not because I didn't know what to say, but because everything that needed to be said already had. Claire hadn't suggested guardianship as a reaction. She had said it like a next step. That mattered, because next steps don't appear suddenly. They're prepared. And if she was already there, then waiting wasn't neutral. It was a risk. By the time I got home, the house felt steadier than it had the night before. Not warmer, not lighter, just clearer. I set my bag down, placed the folder on the table, and stood there for a moment, not thinking about what had happened, thinking about what came next. For years, I had been reacting, adjusting, allowing things to move around me without defining them. That wasn't happening anymore. I picked up my phone. There was a number I hadn't used in a while. I dialed it. Law offices of Bennett and Carter, a calm voice answered. "I'd like to schedule a consultation," I said. The office felt different from the bank, not quieter in sound, but quieter in pace. Everything moved more deliberately, the kind of place where nothing was rushed and nothing was assumed. A woman stepped out after a few minutes. "Mrs. Wallace?" she said. "Yes." "I'm Rachel Carter. Please come in." Her tone was steady, not overly warm, not distant, just clear. I followed her into a small office and sat across from her desk. She didn't reach for paperwork right away. She looked at me first. "What would you like to review today?" she asked. I placed the folder on her desk and opened it. "My financial control," I said, "and how to protect it." She nodded once. "Let's start with what's already in place." We went through it carefully. Accounts, ownership, access, everything I already knew, but structured differently, not as separate pieces, as a system. "You currently have full authority," she said. "No formal delegation, no shared control." "That's correct. And you want to keep it that way?" "Yes." She leaned forward slightly. "Then what matters isn't just maintaining control," she said. "It's making sure it can't be challenged." The word stayed with me. Challenged. "Guardianship was mentioned," I said. Rachel didn't react immediately. "That's a legal process," she said calmly. "It requires someone to argue that you're unable to manage your own affairs." "I'm not." "I can see that." Simple, but then she added, "What matters is not just what's true, it's what can be presented." That shifted something. I had spent years trusting that truth would be enough. It wasn't. "And how do I prevent that?" I asked. "By making your intent explicit," she said, "in a way that can't be reinterpreted." She wrote 2 words on a notepad and turned it toward me: will, trust. "A will defines distribution later," she said, "but a trust defines control now." Now mattered more. "With a trust you decide who has access, who doesn't, and under what conditions anything changes," she continued. "Nothing moves unless you say it does." That was the first time it felt like something was truly mine again. I looked at the page again. For the first time, this wasn't about reacting to something. It was about defining it before anyone else could. "And if someone tries to intervene?" I asked. "The structure holds," she said, "as long as it's properly established." That was the difference, not explanation. Structure. "What would you recommend?" I asked. She reviewed the folder again, her movements precise, unhurried. "A revocable living trust," she said. "You retain full control, nothing transfers unless you explicitly allow it. And if I don't, then no one has access. Clear, final. And the will? A supporting layer," she said. "Consistency across everything else." I leaned back slightly. This wasn't complicated. It had just never been defined clearly before. "What about timing?" I asked. "We can begin immediately," she said. "Drafting, review, execution, it can all move quickly." Quickly mattered. Because Claire hadn't sounded like she was waiting. For the first time, this didn't feel like reacting. It felt like choosing. "Then let's start," I said. Rachel nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "I'll prepare the initial documents," she said. "We'll go through them together before finalizing anything." "Good." She closed the folder neatly. "Once this is in place," she added, "your position becomes unambiguous. For the first time, nothing needed to be assumed. What was mine was finally defined. Clearly, and without anyone speaking for me, that was the word. No assumptions, no quiet adjustments, no one speaking for me in rooms I hadn't entered. Just structure. Defined. I stood as she did. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome?" I left the office the same way I had left the bank, quietly, no announcement, no visible shift, but something had changed, not around me, in how everything was now set. Because for the first time, what had been assumed was being written. Daniel didn't call again that day, or the next. For a while, the silence stayed where it was, unchanged, uninterrupted, not tense, not uncertain, just settled. The kind of quiet that comes after something has already been said too clearly to take back. I didn't try to fill it. There was nothing left that needed explaining. A few days later, the documents were ready. Rachel walked me through everything again, line by line, without rushing, without assumption. Every clause said exactly what it needed to say. Every boundary was clear. Control remained where it had always been. With me. No shared authority, no automatic transfers, no room for interpretation. I signed where I needed to. Not quickly, not reluctantly, just with a steady hand. For the first time, nothing about it felt reactive. It felt defined. After that, things shifted, not all at once, but enough. The house didn't change, but the way I moved through it did. There was no more adjusting things to avoid discomfort, no more leaving space for decisions that weren't mine. Just quiet, and the freedom to recognize it. A week passed before Daniel came back. No call, no message, just a knock at the door. I opened it. He stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly drawn in. Not defensive. Not confident. Uncertain. "Hi," he said. "Hi." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around the room as if checking for something that wasn't visible. Nothing had moved, but something had. He stopped near the center of the room, then turned toward me. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said. "I'm here." That was enough. He nodded once, then looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "I didn't realize how far it had gone," he said. The words came carefully. "I told myself it was temporary," he continued, "that we were just helping, that it would balance out." He paused. "But it didn't." I didn't interrupt. He let out a slow breath. "When the transfers stopped, everything showed up at once," he said. "All the things I hadn't been looking at." That made sense. Patterns don't feel real until they stop. "I should have asked you," he said. "Yes." Simple. Clear. "I should have listened," he added, quieter now. I watched him for a moment, not searching, just seeing what was there. "You're not the only one who made decisions without looking closely," I said. That surprised him. "You didn't cause this on your own." That didn't remove responsibility, but it placed it correctly. He let that sit. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," he said. "They won't?" Another pause. "But that doesn't mean they can't move forward," I added. He looked up, carefully. "You'd be open to that?" he asked. "Yes." The word came easily, because this wasn't about returning to something old. It was about choosing what came next. He exhaled, something in his posture easing, not relief exactly, but the beginning of it. "I'll fix what I can," he said. "You will." Not reassurance, expectation. We didn't say much after that. There was nothing left to prove. He stayed a little while, then moved toward the door. Before leaving, he hesitated. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not shutting me out." I held his gaze. "That wasn't necessary." He nodded, then stepped outside. This time, when the door closed, the silence felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain. Complete. In the weeks that followed, things didn't return to what they were. They became something else. Quieter, clearer. Daniel showed up when he said he would, not often, but consistently. Conversations were shorter, more careful, not perfect, but honest. And that was enough. I spent more time outside the house, walking, visiting places I hadn't gone to in years, letting my days stretch without needing to explain them to anyone. There was a kind of freedom in that. It didn't feel sudden. Just something I finally recognized as mine. The hardest part wasn't losing control, it was realizing how quietly it had been taken. So I want to ask you this: if it happened to you, would you even notice in time? Or would it already be too late? Tell me what you think.